Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Cover Crop Options for Hot and Humid Areas. My name is Robert Maggiani, and I am a Sustainable Agriculture Specialist in the Southwest Office of the National Center for Appropriate Technology, more commonly known as NCAT. NCAT is a national nonprofit organization with 6 offices around the country. We work on sustainable agriculture, sustainable energy, and sustainable communities. Today's webinar comes to you from our Southwest office in San Antonio, Texas. This webinar is a product of the Subtropical Organic Agriculture Research Partnership, or SOAR. SOAR is a project of NCAT and the University of Texas in the Rio Grande Valley. It is funded through the Organic Transitions Program of USDA's National Institute of Food and Agriculture. We are grateful to NIFA for making this event possible. Our speaker today is Justin Duncan. Justin is a Sustainable Agriculture Specialist in the Southwest office of NCAT, also in San Antonio. Justin earned a bachelor's degree in agriculture at Prairie View A&M University and a master's degree in agronomy at Texas A&M. He was part of an extensive multi-year strawberry research project here in Texas last year and is an active member of the Texas Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association. He travels all over the U.S. representing NCAT and even traveled to the Ukraine last year to participate in an international organic herb conference. So I will now turn the microphone over to Justin. Justin?
Hello everyone. Today we're going to be talking about cover crop options for hot and humid areas. This is important because when I first got into organic farming and raising crops and all that, I quickly noticed that the literature that I was reading was very different from what was going on in my fields. So, most of the literature when I first started was geared towards what was going on up north in Michigan and in New York and Wisconsin and all that. And so those methods and the concepts they talked about, I understood them, but they didn't work well in the soils that I was working with. And so some of the things that I've figured out in my trial and error learning of organic farming in the humid South was that cooler areas have much more soil organic matter. Down where I'm at, we're lucky if we get 0.5% to 2% organic matter when we're supposed to have 5% organic matter. So areas up north like Russia and Canada and all that, they store massive amounts of soil organic matter as peat. And as this peat breaks down, it releases huge amounts of carbon dioxide, and that contributes to climate change. So the differences between the northern regions and the southern regions is that since they're cooler, they have a lot more organic matter because it doesn't break down. In the hotter areas, the organic matter, it breaks down really quickly. Stuff volatilizes and all that. So what science shows us is that the cooler areas, if they have a 1 degree rise in temperature, you expect to lose about 10% soil organic matter. That's a big change. But in a warmer area, the same rise of 1 degree Celsius will only result in about a 3% loss in soil organic matter. And that's because the organic matter in the southern areas, it burns off quickly, but what's left is more resilient. And the stuff up north that sticks around because of the cooler temperatures is more ephemeral. It breaks down easier and faster with heat. Soil organic matter is very important to water retention. Soils maintain huge reservoir of water in their organic matter. It's basically like a big sponge. The hotter it becomes, the more water is lost through transpiration and evaporation and evapotranspiration, all that sort of thing. But it's also lost because organic matter is lost. So the loss of organic matter leads to a loss in water holding capacity. Basically, the sponge not only dries out, but it gets smaller every time it the temperature increases. So the less water there is in the soil, the hotter the ambient temperature becomes. So it's basically a self-replicating cycle of heating. The more heat, the less organic matter, the less water, and that creates more heat, and that causes you to lose more organic matter and more water. So soil organic matter decomposes in hot areas much faster than in cool areas. Basically you need twice the amount of inputs in a hot area than you do in a cool area to just break even, and that's every growing cycle. So some of the things that you can do are use different systems of production, like no-till. So if you use no-till, you lose about half the amount of soil organic matter each season of conventional tillage. But using no-till, ceteris paribus, in hot areas should equalize the production in cool areas and the retention of organic matter, but it doesn't. And that's because how would you incorporate it? If you're building up organic matter on the top of the soil surface and you're interested in storing it in the soil, you can't incorporate it with the machine because now it's not no-till. So you have to rely on organisms, and soil organisms do move organic matter around in the soil. That's called bioturbation. That does pull organic matter from the top down into the topsoil, but is it at a rate that you can produce successfully at and profitably at? Soil organic matter, it disperses negative effects, and these effects are toxic chemicals or toxic minerals in the soil, and it works by organic matter breaks down into humus, and it is humus, and it's a part of humus. So basically, organic matter or soil organic matter covers everything. It's all the little bits and pieces of the soil, and it's also the undifferentiated organic matter, which is the humus, which all the stuff breaks down into. But humus is a gigantic molecule, a very, very long, complex molecule, and they have the ability to chelate harmful minerals. So they basically dilute the ability to harm plant roots. And this is important down here because we've got a lot of iron and manganese in the soil, and these are dispersed by humus, as well as aluminum, free aluminum in the soil. And that's what you see in a lot of well-weathered tropical soils. That's very toxic to roots as well. And like you hear about people cutting down the rainforest, and the land is productive for a few years, and then they have to move to the next area. This is because when they first start using these former forests for field production, there's a high amount of organic matter. But after a few cycles of growing, all that organic matter is basically burnt off, and you're left with these highly weathered soils that have a lot of free aluminum in them. And so that's most of what's causing those soils to not be productive anymore. So how do we build soil organic matter? Up north, they use compost, and here they use compost too. I'm not a big fan of composting, and a lot of people don't understand that, and they kind of get mad at me. But I don't believe in composting. In hot areas, compost volatilizes too much of the nitrates and carbon, and so you're trying to create something that's good for the soil and builds the soil up, but at the same time you're losing much of what the plants need to grow and flourish. And so what I do is a much slower process. You can also use manure, but it's really bulky and it's messy to move. In organic production, there's some regulations dealing with using fresh hot manure. So it's an option, but not an immediate option when you're using when you're growing crops that you want to market. So my solution is cover crops. I love cover crops. They're awesome in just about every way because you grow your organic matter right in place. There's no withdrawal period. You don't have to worry about any regulations with it. You grow your cover crops, and depending on how you manipulate them afterwards, your next season's crop can use them. They add nitrogen, and this is true of your legumes, and they use a bacteria called rhizobium. Also bradyrhizobium and a few other different genera of rhizobium. Legumes form associations with the rhizobium. The rhizobium is basically a disease that benefits the plant. When the legume is young, the rhizobium attaches onto the root hairs, and it infects the root, and it causes a nodule to grow. And if it's the right rhizobium, then it will feed the plant. So cover crops also help to move minerals from the subsoil into the topsoil. This is especially true of your deeper rooted cover crops. You know, these things are getting roots down 5, 6, 7, 8 feet deep. So they pull what they need from the lower soils into the topsoil and make it available for the next crop. They also increase soil porosity. Basically, they get in between the soil. They break up compaction, so they make macropores with their bigger roots, and after they die, the root decomposes and it leaves like it's kind of like a fossil, like when you make an imprint of something and then the thing that you made the imprint of decomposes. That's basically what happens in the soil, so that water filtration is going through these pore spaces left by the roots. Now, after you've grown your cover crops, you have to decide if you're going to mow and incorporate them, or you're going to mow and mulch them, or use a no-till system. And that depends on what crop you're going to grow afterwards. So choosing cover crops, there are many different things to consider when you're choosing a cover crop. You know, your soil, does it have the appropriate pH, and you know, some of these cover crops, they cover a very wide range of soil pHs, and you know they do fine, and whether it's a 5 or an 8, they still grow just fine. But some of them have a much more narrow pH requirement. You know, what's the texture of the soil? Is it more clay, or is it more sandy? You know, what cover crop, you know, prefers your specific soil type. Then whether it's a droughty area. Now, my crops I was growing on a silty sand, and it was very droughty. Once it was dry, and it was hard like a rock. But when it was wet, it was something slick and nasty. You'd get your tractor stuck into it. So this is very important, because some cover crops, they can grow in drought conditions better, and most of them don't like wet feet. So if you've got like my soil, what I had to do was switch over to the clovers in the wintertime. They did well in it, and then in the summer we used iron and clay peas, because they could just deal with that soil better. Then also, does it flood? Down here in Texas, we're having a lot of floods recently. So I've seen farmers have their whole field washed away. And when I mentioned wet feet earlier, some of these cover crops, they just cannot be flooded. They cannot stand wet feet. They'll die. The other consideration is diseases. Things like in the south, what's killing out kudzu is soybean rust. And I'll just give an aside on kudzu. Kudzu is a fantastic cover crop, but it's demonized because of its invasive tendencies. But well-maintained kudzu could actually feed the world. I mean, because it feeds the soil. You know, it's a legume. It builds up nitrates. You can feed livestock with it. People are controlling it now in the South using goats and sheep. But you can also feed people with it, and it's even got medicinal value. So it's a cover crop, but it's a little out of control. So don't hate kudzu too much. But when you grow cover crops, it's basically a monoculture. At least when I do it, it's a monoculture. And there's some recommendations by other organizations, and they want you to use all these mixes and stuff, but that causes some issues, and I've had calls about those issues. So I prefer my cover crops to be monoculture. You can deal with them better, but that also kind of sets you up for failure if there is a disease outbreak. So just keep that in mind if you've got diseases. Also important are your growing seasons and cycles. If you're growing some of these that I'm going to talk about, because they are hot season and they're subtropical and tropical crops, will they have, you know, the time they need to complete their life cycle or do what you need them to do? Because if it's something that takes you know, over a year to mature, and you have a frost in between there, and you're dealing with frost tender things, it's not going to really benefit you as much as you needed it to. Also important is your next crop. Some of these things are allelopathic, and we'll talk about one of those later. But allelopathy is when one crop it affects the next crop in a negative way. And if you want to know more about that, we've got a publication that just came out on companion planting and botanical pesticides, and it talks about allelopathy and companionships between plants. Do you need any special equipment to manipulate your cover crop? Now, I know I've seen at a lot of conferences they sell these roller crimpers and all that, and I've tried these, you know, and I've rolled over some cover crops, and those cover crops kind of smiled and shrugged their shoulders and waved at me and said, "Ha, I'm back." So, you know, I don't use a roller crimper. I mow, because when I want my cover crop gone, I'm going to destroy it completely by mowing. But some people can get away with rolling and crimping and all that. That's okay. You have to figure out what is ideal for your particular situation. Then the last consideration is weed control. Now, weed control is one of the most important characteristics of a cover crop for me, because I'm down here in the South. If I'm growing organically, there's not a lot of things that you can do for weeds. And when I say organically, I'm not talking about product replacement. I'm not saying just go out and spray a bunch of organically approved herbicides on things. I'm instead growing things in accordance with like a natural ebb and flow of vegetation. So for me, weed control, I use my cover crops as weed control and tillage. I like using reciprocating spaders. But in any case, these really robust legumes, they have an advantage over their non-legume counterparts. They manufacture their own nitrates, and that's a big plus on legumes. So my idea is to basically set the weeds back, prepare the field, let the weed seeds germinate, go through there and do a really light tillage on that, then plant the cover crop seeds, then press those down with the roller, and now you have the first set of weeds that was going to germinate and be a problem. You've knocked all those down. You've planted your cover crop seeds. Now they grow just unopposed, and that's important because a lot of these things, they don't compete well when they're small, but once they get big, then they crowd out all the other weeds. And so our big weed Well, my big weed is Bermuda grass. I hate Bermuda grass with a deep burning passion, but all these cattle ranchers love this stuff around me. So for me to take a vegetable field and prepare it, I have to, make sure that all the Bermuda grass is gone. And between growing cover crops, and one of my little tricks was I would grow Austrian winter peas or crimson clover over the winter time, and let them completely live out their growth cycle. So they're dying. Well, like the Austrian winter peas, they're dying in like late May, early June, and they leave this nice brown mat of vegetable matter. And so when the weed seeds are trying to germinate back in March and April, they're covered up by this blanket, this covering of vegetative matter, and these seedlings or these propagules from last season, in the case of Bermuda grass, they're cut off from the sun, so they're starved and they tend to die out. So after that, then I would incorporate the Austrian winter peas or mow the clover, and it would really make a nice field. So we would get rid of weeds about 89 to 99% just using cover crops and tillage. No chemicals, no spraying anything, just cover crops and tillage. Alright, so all the cover crops that I'm going to talk about today are legumes, because as I mentioned, I don't like grasses. Grasses, they rob the soil of everything, and the legumes, they're constantly replacing both organic matter and nitrates into the soil. And down here where I'm at, that's the most important thing, because the soils are hot, the organic matter is burning up, and when the organic matter leaves, it's taking the nitrates and all the carbon with it. So I'm always wanting to replace everything back into the soil by using legumes. Some people love grasses for different aspects. People use rye for its allelopathic effects on weeds, but I just don't like it because I need my nitrogen. So the stuff I'm talking about today it's not comprehensive. It's just little handy facts. It's just to kind of pique your curiosity, because we'll have a publication later on in the summer, and it'll talk about all this stuff that I'm talking about today in depth. And I hope you enjoy the crops that I chose for you today. One last thing is inoculation. Since I am talking about legumes, it's very important that you inoculate, and it depends on what the fields were before. If you're looking at like a Phaseolus rhizobium for like common beans, those persist in the soil pretty well. Around me, I've got the pea inoculant, or the pea rhizobium. It's in the soil. It's everywhere. The clover rhizobium, it's everywhere. So some places, or some rhizobium, they're ubiquitous. They're there. You don't really have to worry about them. But it's good to inoculate, because the wrong species of rhizobium will form nodules on the plant that you've selected. But what will happen if it's not the right, if it doesn't have the right compatibility, what you'll notice is that when you look at the nodules and you break them open, it'll be like brown or gray on the inside. A productive nodule is pink. So you can always test your legumes by pulling one up, looking at the root, seeing first if it's got nodules, second how many nodules it has, and then third, is that nodule working, by breaking one of the nodules open and looking at the pink. So the first thing I really like is perennial peanuts. These are prostrate and creeping plants. They're kind of new-ish in the South. People have been growing them in Florida for quite a while. These are propagated by rhizomes, excuse me. And the inoculant is basically included in the plugs. And if you've ever grown any peanuts or cowpeas, because peanuts and cowpeas use the same inoculant, you'll be okay with this. They have somewhat showy flowers. You see on the picture, they're little yellow flowers. They can be used as an ornamental. You can plant them out there and you know, have little pretty swaths of peanut flowers. Like other peanuts, they've got they've got compound leaves, but they've got 4, which is kind of a weird number to me because I'm used to seeing trifoliates. So this is, I guess, a 4-foliate. They fix about 150 pounds of nitrogen per acre. And if you look at the picture, the peanuts are a little bit differently shaped than the peanuts you're used to. The next one is Cajanus cajan, or pigeon pea. Around the rest of the world, this is a food crop. It's found all over tropical areas. I've eaten it. I had friends who were Panamanian. They make this thing called coconut rice, and they put pigeon peas in it, and they're pretty tasty. It's a pretty efficient nitrogen fixer. It puts about 250 pounds per acre of nitrates into the soil. It produces about 2.5 tons of dry matter per acre, or 35 tons of fresh weight per acre. It gets pretty tall, so it can be used as like a hay or a forage crop or whichever, but it's tall, so you know, if you're going to harvest it, make sure that it's at an appropriate stage. An interesting thing about it is the roots exude phycetic acid, and this helps release insoluble phosphates from the soil. So this helps itself to the phosphates, and then if you mow it and incorporate it or mulch it, it also helps the next crop. Cassia, it has a couple of names. It's either Cassia rotundifolia or Chemacrista rotundifolia, but these are partridge peas. Now, the rotundifolia is the preferred cover crop around, I guess, the world and in tropical areas where they're using Cassia. But there's one that's native to Texas, which is Cassia fasciculata. Now, fasciculata, it's more erect. It stands up, but you have to beware of these if you're using them as a forage crop, because they can be toxic to cattle in their later stages of development. So after they flower, or once they get towards flowering and then up to seed set, you don't want cattle grazing on them. It uses the same inoculant as cowpeas and peanuts. As I said before, the fasciculata is native to Texas, and it produces about 560 pounds of seed per acre. So if you want to produce this, and a lot of these that I'm talking about today, they don't have good seed sources. So the opportunity is there for someone to, you know, start a seed company specializing in some of these forages, some of these cover crops. Next is Centrosema molle, or Centrosema pubescens. If I include both names, it's because you know, science is always advancing, and one group of scientists might use one name and another might use a different name. So this is a soft butterfly pea. It's a really pretty flower, you know. It's got the little papilionaceous thing going on, the little keel. It's a pretty little flower, but it's a workhorse in the fields because it can fix about 300 pounds of nitrogen per year per acre. That's quite a bit. That'll save you some good money on nitrogen-based fertilizers. It produces about 5 tons of dry matter per acre per year. This one, unlike most of the others, it tolerates waterlogging, so that's a plus if you're in floody areas. It has really deep tap roots, and it's good for bank stabilization. Kudzu was another one that they brought here for bank stabilization, so, you know, be aware, you know, that all these plants were brought here for a purpose. Now, those purposes may have changed over the years, but there was a purpose when they came. Its use is used as a green manure crop in rubber and palm plantations. Now, I mentioned earlier, talked about manure, that's animal manure. Green manure is another name for a crop that you mow and incorporate in the soil for its manure-like benefits to the soil. It's also a fodder crop. You can let your animals graze on it. It does about 20 tons fresh matter per acre, and then 3 tons of dry matter. And that's the fresh is like it says, it's fresh. It's still wet. It's got all the water in it. The dry is when you've tried to make it into hay. Another pretty cover crop is Clitoria terneata. This one is the butterfly pea, and it's native to sub-Saharan Africa. Like Centrosema, it's also inoculated with cowpea type rhizobium. It's very beautiful. I love the flowers on this. I used to grow this in the greenhouse and let it run all over the place. It yields about 2 tons per acre dry matter, and if you don't really do too much to it, but it'll yield more if you fertilize it. About 15 pounds per acre is the optimal seeding rate. Next is Crotolaria juncea, also known as sun hemp. This one fixes about 300 pounds of nitrogen or nitrates per acre per year as well. It produces about 5 tons of dry matter. It effectively attracts beneficials, especially trichogramma, because little moths will go in the sun hemp and they'll lay their eggs, and the trichogramma will go in there and find it, and then they'll build up in the Crotolaria, and then they'll move on to adjacent fields. This is another one that's also inoculated with the cowpea group. This is Desmodium uncinatum. It's the silverleaf Desmodium. It roots at nodes very similar to sweet potatoes. It's native to South America. It's got a cousin called Desmodium intortum, but it's more tolerant of flooding. It's in high water tables and to lower pHs, so it can take some different extremes than its green leaf cousin. The difference between uncinatum and intortum is uncinatum has the silver stripes, and intortum is just a solid green leaflet. These are not suitable for clay soils. They need very good, very well-drained soils, well-drained sandy soils. These don't produce very well in dry periods, but they will live. They'll hang on, but they won't be productive when it gets too dry. These will benefit from a little bit of a molybdenum application. A lot of these trace elements and micronutrients, we really don't know what they're good for exactly in some of these crops, but this one has been shown to get better production with molybdenum. This one has a very high tannin content, high tannin content, so it's not as palatable to livestock, but it helps control Haemonchus contortus, which is intestinal nematodes. Next is Lablab purpurea. Many people know this as an ornamental. They call it the hyacinth bean. This is a food crop in Africa and Asia. You can actually eat the young pods, but they have to be young. You cannot eat them after they start drying out and all that. Here in the United States, it's gaining popularity as a deer attractant, and I think that's pretty cool that it started off as a food crop, and now we're over here using it also as a food crop, but for deer. So that's pretty interesting. It's got very, very showy flowers. I love the flowers on these. They're very pretty, and like I said earlier, they're edible when they're succulent. When they're in the very, very young stage, you can eat them. They're a weekly perennial, and that's depending on the variety and where you're at. If you're in a place where it's going to frost, they're going to die over the wintertime, but they'll reseed and all that. It effectively smothers and crowds out weeds, but it's initially slow to start. So it needs weeding until the vines are actively running. Next is Mucuna pruriens. These are velvet beans, and to you pranksters out there, this is what where itching powder comes from. So there's a form of it, a cultivar called utilis, or Mucuna pruriens var utilis, that's not so pruritus. It's not so itchy. So this was once widely used in the southern United States, but it was supplanted by soybeans, probably because they didn't have the utilis variety yet, and so it was still itchy. So they wanted to get rid of this itchy thing and replace it with something more tame. A related species to this is Mucuna bracteata. It's becoming more popular in tropical regions and is used as a cover crop in rubber plantations. Rubber plantations in India. It could be very useful for papaya groves here in the United States. Next is the Phaseolus coccineus, or the scarlet runner bean. These are also another ornamental. They're from Central America. They spread to South America, North America, and all that. Well, they spread by people. These are a perennial, but they're often treated as an annual. Both the roots and pods can be eaten, like Lablab. The pods should only be eaten when they're young. And this is related to common beans. Common beans are Phaseolus vulgaris. This is Phaseolus coccineus. So both of them use common bean inoculant. Yields of scarlet runner bean they're better in monoculture than interplant it with other things. But if you're going to intercrop it with something, the best one is sunflowers. Next is Stylosanthes guyanensis. This is native to Central and South America. It can grow over 1 meter tall, sometimes up to 2.5 meters, depending on the fertility of the soil and the activity of its rhizobium. This prefers open textured soils, no heavy clays. It does not do well with wet feet. It does not do well in poorly drained soils. It's very, very adaptable when pH is concerned, from a range of 4 to 8.3, from very, very acid to very, very alkaline. So it can take it all as long as its roots are in a well-drained soil. Its erect habit lends itself to multi-cropping with a scrambling type of legume to get even more nitrogen fixation. So you've got one legume, it stands up tall, like the Cassia fasciculata or the sun hemp. You can put another leguminose cover crop underneath them, like the Cassia. The Cassia rotundifolia or iron and clay peas or something like that scrambles on the bottom, so that you can get massive amounts of nitrogen fixation in vegetation and dry matter and all those good things that you want from a cover crop. Now earlier I mentioned that some of these crops have allelopathic tendencies. Stylosanthes is one of those. If you're going to use Stylosanthes, you cannot come behind it with cotton, because it will depress your yield in your cotton crops. Next is Vigna radiata, which is, I mentioned iron and clay peas. This is not an iron and clay pea, but this is related to them. This is mung beans. Now you can eat the little beans. They're cute. I like mung beans. They look like something I want to eat. But this is where bean sprouts come from. These benefit from arbuscular mycorrhiza, and mycorrhiza, if you don't know, are soil fungus that form association with plant roots, and they set up an exchange. So the plant gives the fungus carbohydrates, and the fungus gives the plant water and nutrients from far away. So mycorrhiza vastly extend the reach of plant roots. So this is one of those that benefits from inoculation with both the rhizobium and mycorrhiza. This is a grain type legume. is known all over the world to use as used for human consumption. Now the cultivars, or the selected varieties, are usually erect, while the wild forms are more prostrate, and the prostrate forms are better suited for cover crops. All right, so for more information on this topic, you can email me, Justin D. at NCAT.org. And thanks for watching.
Well, thank you, Justin. We really appreciate it. That's a lot of legumes you just talked about. For you listeners, if you have a question about cover crops, you're welcome to contact Justin at the email you see on your screen. As Justin mentioned, he's working on a publication that will go into more detail on the topics covered in our webinar today. That publication will be available later this summer of 2016 on the ATRA Information Service. Just as another reminder, the ATRA project offers free technical assistance on sustainable agriculture and other topics. We're always happy to get your calls and emails. You can call us at the number you see there, 1-800-346-9140, or if someone prefers speaking Spanish, you see the number there, 1-800-411-3222. Or you can email us at the email address you see there, askanag@ncat.org. Well, folks, that ends today's webinar. We sure thank all of y'all for joining us, and we'll see you next time.